Hi, Deacon Ed McCormick here in the last installment of our series, Finding God in All Things. And as I said last time, I'm focusing on our ability to find Christ in all things. And I want to draw your attention this time to a passage that occurs at the beginning of Paul's letter to the Colossians and then chapter 2 of Ephesians. I encourage you to read both of these passages. In Colossians, from verse 15, chapter 1, verse 15, to about chapter 20, or verse 20, Paul speaks about the risen Jesus reconciling all things to God, heaven and earth, reconciling all of humanity to God, and reconciling us to each other. And in the letter to the Ephesians, chapter 2, Paul uses this image of a dividing wall. How the forces of hostility divide us from each other. One parent from another, one child from another. It divides families and cities and communities and nations. And Paul believes the death and resurrection of Jesus has broken down that dividing wall and in fact killed the forces of hostility, freeing us to create new relationships. Paul says that he is our peace. And so Paul and all the other writers of the New Testament think the death and resurrection of Jesus has launched the new age of peace promised by the great prophets, especially Isaiah. That's why in John chapter 20, Jesus, when he breathes on them, he says peace twice. He's announcing the age of peace. His death and resurrection launched this age of peace. It's why he tells the disciples to forgive people, to release them from those burdens. In Paul's mind, this is interpersonal and cosmic, that the risen Jesus is at work, healing and reconciling and freeing us. And so this is another way that we can find the risen Jesus at work in our lives, particularly in our Christian communities. And it's why the sacrament of reconciliation is so important. But the sacrament of reconciliation is meant to be this sign and experience of the practice of reconciling and forgiving that is dominant in the entire Christian community. And this can only happen if our hearts are healed and freed and our minds are healed and freed and expanded. And that outpouring of the Holy Spirit and the presence of the risen Jesus between us and among us is the way in which we start to experience reconciliation between us and God, between heaven and earth ultimately, but between each other in our families, in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods. And you may have noticed experiences of people forgiving each other, asking for forgiveness. You may have noticed times when you have been healed, when part of you that's been hurt has been healed, where all of a sudden people have let go of grudges. I encourage you to read the great Bishop Desmond Tutu's book about the South African Reconciliation Commission. The title is No Future Without Forgiveness. And the entire book is a testimony to both the horrors that people endured during apartheid in South Africa, but above all, the concrete ways in which the risen Jesus is at work trying to heal and free and reconcile people. Because on our own, we will not forgive. On our own, we will not let go of grudges. On our own, we cannot get healed from the burdens and the pain and the disappointment. But when he comes between us, between those parts of us inside of us, when the risen Jesus comes between us and pours out his Spirit into our communities and relationships, into our parish communities, healing can occur, reconciliation can occur. A way forward is found. So I encourage you to participate in what he is doing. And therefore you will begin to notice how the risen Jesus is found in all things, reconciling everything.